The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Hi everyone, I'm Thomas Sanjurjo, and you're listening to The Secrets of Blade Runner 2049, Denis Villeneuve's sequel to the 1982 sci-fi classic, and I'd argue a classic in its own right. Joining me tonight is another Thomas. We promised that neither of us are actually replicants. Thomas Salerno. Hi, Thomas.
Hey there, Thomas.
We missed that joke last time, and Dom was like, "We have to make sure you get the replicant comment in there." And also joining me tonight is Jack Baruzzini. Hi, Jack.
How's it going?
It's going great. I have been excited for this one, and I was super excited with this. I'm going to start off before we get too far into this conversation. If you have not watched this film, we are going to spoil the heck out of it. And while normally that's not a big deal, with this film it is. I really feel like this film is one that it's not like it's a big, huge plot twist, but you ruin a lot of the mood of the movie if you know the end before you get into it. So if you haven't watched it, it's on Netflix right now. I was super happy that it was on Netflix so I could go watch it without having to pay an arm and a leg for it, even though I'm going to go buy it. You know, I know I'm going to go buy it, but still. It's streaming on Netflix, so go watch it and then come back and enjoy the podcast after you've watched it. This is your last warning. We're going to spoil the heck out of it. So, I think this is like my fourth time watching this one. I saw it in theaters the day it came out. I saw it another time in theaters because it was just so amazing. I had to go a second time and see it. This was my wife's first time watching it with me, so she didn't go with me either. I don't know how I went to the movies without her twice to go see this one, but so this was like my fourth time. How many times have you guys seen this one at this point?
I've seen it twice now.
Twice? Okay.
Yeah, I actually missed this one in theaters. This is my first time watching it, was preparing for this show.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah. We were talking before the show and we were, comparing the two, as you should never do with such great films. But I think we all kind of agreed that we love the first one. We love the 1982 movie. It was a great movie. But this movie's really good, like even arguably better. And so after having waited, 2 decades for a follow-up to, not ever expecting anything from the first one, going to see this one in the theater, I was just blown away. I loved it. I really did. I would say that this is a better film, honestly. And I think that's just because the film has come so far and so much leeway was given for it. So what do you guys think? Same kind of sense?
Yeah, I definitely would say that this is the better of the two movies, and that's not taking away from the original at all, because the original is great, and without that you wouldn't have this movie. But I almost feel like this movie was the movie that Ridley Scott would have made if he'd had the leeway and the budget to, because this movie takes all the core concepts from the original and builds upon them in a way that doesn't feel like it's just rehashing it for a nostalgia tie-in. Like, it expands the universe. It does it in a very organic and interesting way. And I think it also does it in a way where you could watch this movie without having seen the original, and it's still a good movie. You definitely should see it beforehand just because of the stuff that ties in. But I think you could go into this movie without having seen the original, and you'd still be able to know what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Jack said. I really thought that this was one of those sequels that, instead of taking away from the original movie, really builds on it, builds up the lore and the universe, and explores the themes that the original movie did in an even deeper and even more compelling way. Yeah, I'm sad that I missed it in theaters, but the only reason I didn't see it in theaters is because I hadn't seen the first one yet, and I was worried I might be missing a lot of stuff. But I think Jack's right. I think you can watch this movie on its own and it still works. They kind of explain to you everything you need to know. And so, yeah, I definitely think that as a piece of science fiction cinema and as a piece of cinema generally, this is a fantastic movie in every way. Real kudos to Denis Villeneuve once again for impressing me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have done the Secrets of Dune, and that's one that I'm really heavily involved in as well. And I was worried about hearing that was coming out, and I didn't really know Denis Villeneuve very well at that point. I actually have never seen Arrival, to be honest.
Oh, you should.
So I need to go watch it because just because I know now who he is. But it was watching this movie in theaters that I was like, oh, okay, I am not at all concerned because this guy knows how to do his stuff, and I think that Dune is going to be fine in his hands. So yeah, that was I wholeheartedly agree, and I would love to hear the perspective of someone who has seen this movie, but did not see the first one, and maybe hasn't still or watched the first one after having seen this one. I'd love to see what that perspective is, because it does. I feel like it's a very self-encapsulated story, but some of the questions that it asks, it starts in the middle of asking them, and I feel like that's something that the first movie opened the box, and this movie just pries it open further and says, okay, we're not done with any of this stuff. We just started scratching the surface, and just kind of pulls it the rest of the way open and just starts asking even bigger questions and gets deeper and deeper with them. Yeah. And I think the beautiful thing about this movie too, and you guys tell me how you feel about this. I'm really struck by the pacing of it, because it's nearly 3 hours, never feels like it gets slow, but never rushes to anything. Like it's so well paced.
Yeah. And I love, that's like one of my favorite things about this. Like, this is my ideal kind of movie. I like big, slow movies that don't feel bogged down. I guess Ridley Scott, one comment he made about this movie was he thought it was good, but they could have cut a half an hour out of it and it still would have been good. And I absolutely disagree with that. I like that you get like these big establishing shots, these slow scenes. Like, I love long cuts in scenes, and just how it doesn't feel rushed. Like, so many movies nowadays are so frenetic. Like this is kind of like, this is the opposite of like the Star Wars, Marvel, like over the top, like explosions, something has to be happening every single minute. It's just, it lets you take in the universe and take in the world, and it's like a beautifully made movie.
Yeah, and like even when apparently nothing is happening on screen, I'm still captivated just by like the cinematography and the music, and just what is being shown in frame is just beautiful. So, even in those slow moments, it's never like, oh, this is dull, or like nothing of interest is happening. No, like and I felt like in that way, it was kind of similar to the first movie, because the first movie also did that. It would have, long shots, at least in the cut of the first movie that I saw, and I felt that this sequel did that even better.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think the moment you really see it in this movie is the moment where he's in the furnace room and going to find the toy. And if you watch that scene, like, you are building the anticipation. He's going to find it, right? You know that's what this is leading to. But just him walking, and it takes him several different shots to walk through that corridor, and it's not a long corridor. Like, it's one of those things where that's definitely like at least 30 seconds worth of film that could have been just sliced, and because we know where he's going, he goes there and he does it. But that anticipation that builds, and the tension that you feel while you're walking with him to that point is so good. And there's just so many shots like that. There's so many moments like that in this film where you're there, the two characters are staring at each other, just breathing, and you need it.
Yeah, no, it's got that. There's like a tense feeling throughout the movie, but it never feels forced. Even just like with the opening shot, like it's a dude harvesting his grubs in his farm, and very slow pace, just building up to that. And even the action scenes in this movie they're very subdued, and they don't feel just stuck in there. Like one of my principal gripes with most movies nowadays is, and I like the Marvel movies fine. Like I'm not trying to hate on them or anything, but my favorite parts of the Marvel movies are the character parts. Like once they get into the we're going to destroy a city for 20 minutes, that's the part I want to skip over.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree there too. Yeah, I think that they do make some interesting characters, and it would be great to see more of this kind of building of who they are and what they're about. And so I have to admit that in my notes, I'm totally going to gloss over him. So I don't want to skip the opening replicant that we get to see is Sapper Morton, who's played by Dave Bautista. And he does like this just shows his range as an actor, because you go from this is almost immediately after Guardians of the Galaxy. So you've got this picture of Drax in your head, right? And you go to this guy, he's playing the same meathead guy, but in such a completely different way. And gives the background of that character so well. And I love that scene where Kay comes in to retire him, and Kay really doesn't want to, and you feel that. But you also feel that, Sapper can't let him just take him in, because there's more going on there.
Right.
Yeah, I totally got the idea that Sapper is like this ex-soldier who like has now, as he says to Kay, I've seen a miracle, and it's changed him. But he's still in there. He's still a guy who can take you out and wreck you, because he's an ex-super soldier. He was just great in that scene. And I always like seeing Dave Bautista in stuff. And I'm glad he's in Dune as well. And it was a nice surprise seeing him here.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess he's been quoted as saying that he's glad that Denis Villeneuve has let him be in these kind of roles, because he does not want to get typecast as the Drax type character. Like he wants to actually be able to play a range of characters.
And he does. He brings such good, he's got such good stage presence, especially opposite such incredible actors. It's really incredible to see him. So but before we get to talking spoilers and to kind of breaking down the themes of the film, the last thing that I really want to touch on is the music, because just this year we've lost Vangelis, who was the music director for the original film. And he didn't work on this one. He wasn't involved in the music for this one. This one was Hans Zimmer and another collaborator. And but they do such a brilliant job of giving that tribute to the original score without just directly copying it. Except in important places, except like for very significant moments, they do port it over. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up too was like the Wallace core ringtone that pops up. Do you guys recognize that one? Do you know what that's from?
No.
Oh, man, yeah, I remember looking it up. It's not Peter and the Wolf, because that's what I.
It is.
Oh, okay,
it is actually Peter and the
yes.
Wolf. Yep. Yeah. So which is a great, like, it's this Russian kids symphony that tells a story of this little boy, and kind of this very antic-y story where he's like saves a duck from him. Well, he doesn't actually save the duck dies, but he manages to trap this wolf who was attacking his house, and then goes on parade with it and everything. It's a neat story if you ever get a chance to listen to it, but it was fun hearing that very playful tone in the midst of all this like really high drama. And that being the marker for knowing that Kay was a customer of the Wallace Corporation.
Yeah. I think most people would probably recognize that from, I think they use it in Christmas Story. It's like the leitmotif they use for the bully.
Oh, it might be. Yeah, because it's the wolf thing that goes. That's true.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to go look that up now too. But yeah, it's a instantly recognizable piece. But then at the same time, it's kind of like just thrown in there as this thing that's very jarring and very different from everything else that we're hearing in the low tones and the very subdued background music, to suddenly have this ringtone pop through, and it gets your attention every single time it plays. So
yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we're at the point where I think we're going to talk spoilers. So before we get there, I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the secrets of movies and TV, especially Maureen, Suzanne S., Adam S., Dan W., and Joshua D. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the secrets of movies and TV and all the shows here at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So if you haven't had anything spoiled yet and you still haven't watched the movie, go do it now, because we're about to like ruin it for you. So I like to approach these podcasts in the sense of talking about the themes that the movie presents. And this movie is so similar to the first one in a lot of the themes that it presents, but it's so different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's subtly different, and it's beautiful for that. But all of the themes that it presents have a lot of the same weight, and really even add to the density of what the first one was approaching. So you have Wallace, who's overreaching, dangerously overreaching in his advance of science. You have the LAPD, who's kind of like holding back the flood of what could be, what's possible, and just keeping that line between the worlds, as the lieutenant says, that there's a wall. And if you let anybody know that there's not a wall, then you're going to have a war. And then our Blade Runner in this one is actually, as a lot of people speculate from the first movie, a lot of people wonder if Deckard was a replicant. Well, we actually have a replicant Blade Runner in this movie. I don't know that they ever referred to him as a Blade Runner, but that's clearly what he is. He's going to retire replicants.
I think doesn't it?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, so it tells us a little bit about the history of the blackout and things like that. So yeah, I love that it's playing on some of the themes from the first movie, and some of the thoughts that people had about the first movie, and kind of giving us that idea of like a replicant going to retire replicants. But then it is like a totally different world than the original movie, and that's explained kind of in the lore itself, where there was this big blackout and then everything came back. And I have to ask the question, did you guys watch any of the between material that was produced?
Oh no, I didn't know anything about that.
I didn't know there was any actually.
There are some shorts that are really good, kind of preview material for Blade Runner 2049. So I was so hyped about this movie when it came out that I was like, every single thing that came out I was watching, right?
Nice.
So there was some stuff about Wallace Corps and who Wallace was and how he came to be. There were a couple of shorts that showed the blackout and the effects that it had. I have looked around and tried to find them anywhere, and I can't. So I'm hoping I'm going to get a special edition of 2049 when I buy it. And I'm hoping that all of that stuff is included as part of the bonus material.
Yeah, definitely.
And I was really kind of surprised that Netflix didn't have it all kind of bundled in, as an extra for the movie.
I'm actually going to check. We'll do this live while because I got it on iTunes and it has all the iTunes extras, and I want to see if it has those listed as the extras, because I want to watch those if it does.
Yeah, I hope it does, because they were really good. Like, they were really interesting, and they filled in a lot of these gaps. Like, okay, so what happened?
It does. So
all right,
if you
excellent.
get it on iTunes, it has 2022 Blackout, 2036 Nexus Dawn, and 2048 Nowhere to Run.
There you go. Okay, those are the ones. Yep.
Cool. I'll have to watch those. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can find them, check them out, because they're really good.
Because I love lore stuff. Anything that builds up the universe, I really like.
Oh, you get some good ones out of this, and I think I'm a guy who I like lore to be subtle and to be hinted at. So inside of the movie itself, and they do a really good job in this one of just kind of poking at it. Like, we see Wallace in like 3 scenes, I think, and but we know enough about him through those 3 scenes to know that there's a lot more going on there, and that's such a cool way to present characters.
One question I had, and I'd like to get both of your guys' take on this maybe. I was wondering, is Wallace himself a replicant? Like, I wasn't sure through watching this movie. Like, just, I don't know, something about him. Like, I know he's blind, but I know he has those implants on the back of his head that, like, they show in one scene. And the way he's talking about, like having replicants go out into the galaxy and like settle planets and stuff and kind of take over. I'm like, so is he a replicant? Or is he just a human who wants to use replicants for his purposes?
Well, let's start there. So this,
Yeah.
what I was going to kind of do is break down the movie into the characters that we see and the relationships that they have, because I think that really shows the themes of the movie. So let's start with Wallace and Love, because I think those two are kind of inextricable. And I think the best scene for Wallace is the one where there's the freshly birthed replicant that kind of falls out of the birthing canal, and he's analyzing her, and she's not perfect. She is perfect, right? She's a replicant, so obviously she's perfect, but she's not what he's shooting for, which is this idea of domination, of something that can give birth and can continue to create itself. And so you really see this image of him wanting to be God. And his angel, he even refers to her as his angel, is there with him, and that's Love, standing beside him, like watching this proceeding. So how'd you guys feel about that scene? Because I think that's a really intense and very complicated scene to watch.
Yeah, it's a very affecting scene. It's very creepy, and it's done in a very subtle way. Like, it's not over the top. Just the way they're treating this being as a thing, and it's, she's just been birthed and she doesn't really have a concept of what's going on. They're just this very materialistic, mechanical view of everything, and he believes he can control everything. And one thing he can't control is actually creating new life naturally, and that's what really sticks in his craw, it seems like.
Yeah, it was a very, very unsettling scene, but it's kind of a really good introduction to Wallace as a character, because it basically tells you it gives you an idea of what his angle is, and what his worldview is, and how he views, his relationships with other characters and also just replicants in general. Like you said, Jack, he views them as just kind of objects, even though they are basically humans. Like, I kept thinking about that throughout the movie, that, okay, they're born in a test tube and not in a womb, but there's literally nothing that makes them different from a human biologic, and it's just unsettling to see humans used in this way.
But then the odd thing about that is that Wallace refers to them all as his children.
Right.
Like he really does have this sense that he is birthing them, but in almost this proprietary way, right? Where he's taken the negative attributes that you could think of and relate to God, right? Of like God, the creator, but then is aloof and views us as broken and worthless, right? And so if you only took that perspective of God, you would end up with this kind of Wallace figure. And he wants more for them, but he wants more for them not for their sake, but for his sense of conquest and of reaching out.
He's a father in the way that Saturn is a father.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
Right, for mythology, yeah.
And I think the blindness is such a good metaphor that, he's blind, but he's overcome the blindness with this technology. And that means he hasn't really learned anything from it. And he hasn't learned to be humble because of it. He hasn't learned how to overcome it. He's just fixed the problem with a technological solution. And so he's not a better person for being in that state, which he's such a, and it's brilliant because he's such a complicated character, and he's on screen for, 5 minutes out of a 3-hour movie.
It's funny too, like his relationship with Love. he calls her his angel over and over again. An angel, as we know, means like messenger of God, and she's kind of his messenger, and says like she speaks for him. She does the dirty work that he doesn't want to do, and in many ways she kind of like is an instrument of his will. Essentially, she's not so much her own person as much as an instrument.
And you get this weird vibe between her and him where it's almost like it feels like she hates him, almost like she she hates him, but she loves him at the same time. Like she's stuck between those two.
Right, because yeah, she seems repulsed by some things that he does.
Yeah.
Well, watching him massacre this, freshly born replicant. And then I think for her too, like you watch it a couple of times and you get this movie you can watch like 20 times and still every single time you're going to get some new texture out of it. And watching it just from her perspective, like every time she's on screen, just think about from her perspective what she's going through. She's watching this man that created her and refers to her as his angel kill another replicant just because it can't give birth. And so even if she discovers this child, the child is a mark of her failure, right? She can't be that. She'll never be good enough for him. And at the same time, like one of her final statements when she's fighting with Kay is, "I'm the best," and
Right.
like in the sense that she's proven that she's the best, and like there was like she needed to, right? And that's the implication you get there is that she had something that she had to prove, and now she's proven it. And it's it's just so like the character's so deep and played really, really well as this aloof, sort of emotionless, but also very impacted by her own sense of what she's doing. Because we see, especially the moment when she meets Lieutenant Joshi, and she is crying while she's murdering her.
Right.
And that it's like you see the contraposition of what she's feeling about what she's doing and the fact that she still does it because it's her responsibility. So, yeah, I am absolutely in awe of Love and the way that she comes through in this film. I think that moving on from Wallace and kind of into her and the way that she relates to Kay, because they are both replicants, and they both, we get back to that theme from the first movie we talked about, where there was this question of purpose, like what is purpose and why and is purpose important? And to these two, it obviously is. Like their purpose is very important for different reasons. Like Love has completely embraced hers, and Kay struggles throughout the movie with whether or not he actually has one. And so as we see him kind of given this idea of a greater purpose, and then we see it taken away from him, it challenges him, and it's such it's an interesting growth that he goes through because of that.
Definitely. And it's interesting to see the way his search for his identity changes throughout the movie, like where he thinks that maybe he is the child. And then, later on we learn the truth about that, and just how that shapes him as a character.
Yeah, I was definitely on board with him as a character, with Kay through the entire time. No matter what he's doing, no matter what he's feeling, I'm yeah, it just, he was a very effective protagonist. I just felt like I was completely, entranced with his story, and I wanted to know where it was going to end and what's next that's going to be revealed. I was just on the edge of my seat the entire time, like not knowing, like, okay, when are the tables going to be turned on us again?
Right. Yeah, because it starts out one way and then it moves. So I think moving along with Kay, I think the relationship that he has with Madam, with Lieutenant Joshi, is such a good indicator for how replicants are viewed, because he has to go in for this baseline test every single time he comes back from a mission. He has to go in for a baseline test that checks where his mental state is, and then he has to go and do a debrief with her afterwards. And she doesn't really know how to think about him, so she's the chief of police. She uses these replicants as obviously as Blade Runners, but she doesn't really know where to place him. Like, is he someone I can befriend? Is he just this item? Is he just a tool in my tool belt, or is he actually someone that I can connect with? And you see that over and over again with her.
Yeah, no, she's definitely played very well. And you do get throughout the movie that the replicants are still looked down on and not treated well. And then she's kind of got almost just like a very blasé view towards him, where she's going to treat him with respect, I think, probably just because that's what our human evolution is designed to do. If something looks human, we're going to treat it that way. But she still also is very utilitarian in her relationship with him and the struggles that she has with that. And also you just get that she's just so burnt out on everything that
Yeah.
Yeah. Very the kind of, cynical, seen it all kind of cop.
yeah. And it is interesting. I was apprehensive when I started this because Ryan Gosling is in the lead and I just associate him with like rom-coms and stuff, but he did a fantastic job in this movie.
He was amazing. Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, the weight that he brings to the character, the emotional range that he has, because for a character that's supposed to be emotionless, everything's supposed to be really subtle. And for a guy coming from rom-coms where everything's kind of over the top all the time, right? To bring that down to that level of subtlety but also give every single emotional movement that sense, like you were saying, Thomas, where it's just you're on board for everything he does. Like every single move he makes, you're like, okay, yeah, I totally see where you were going. I understand why you believe that. That makes sense. And you never doubted him for a second as a narrator, which is cool because I think there are a lot of dubious characters in this story that we don't know, that aren't telling the truth, that are clearly lying, obviously for good reason in many cases and for nefarious reasons in others. But with Kay, you always get the sense that he's wearing his heart on his sleeve, and that what you see is what you get with him. That's just the way it is. So, yeah, and I think I think my favorite scene between him and Lieutenant Joshi is the scene where she comes to his apartment and is drinking his alcohol, and he asks, "So what happens if I finish that?" And he just kind of shrugs, and she doesn't really know where to go with it. Like, it's his alcohol, and if anybody didn't catch from the first one, that's rare. Like, that's an very expensive thing that he has, is any kind of alcohol.
Right. Yeah.
Very expensive. So she's essentially saying, like, what happens if I take this last drop of this stuff that costs you probably a month's worth of wages? And he doesn't have a response to it. So we're going to go into some of the heavier hitting relationships now. And let's talk about Kay and Deckard, who is the returning character here. And I'm saving, I know this is one where you would think, oh, this is the big relationship, right? But I really think that there are a couple of others that are more interesting that I'd like to get to later. So I'm going to push them off a little bit. But so Kay, through his trip, he has to go and he ends up having to find Deckard. He doesn't know that it's Deckard, but he knows that it's someone related to this child that he's hunting down. And he ends up, I think it's Las Vegas that he ends up in.
It's Vegas, yeah. Although I don't think they tell you that in the movie. I had to look it up.
Yeah. Well, I think they give you one like really quick clip when Love's looking through the computer and she sees where his transponder's coming from on his police car. And it shows it travels, east into essentially what's the desert. So you kind of guess that it's Las Vegas, and that's why with the roulette tables and all that kind of stuff. But,
right. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's been there was some sort of nuclear incident, so it's basically a dead zone, and you're not supposed to go there. And you see all the derelict pageantry that they have. They're like, I really like the holographic Elvis that they have during the fight scene.
Yes.
Oh, that was great.
It was such a good juxtaposition, and how it was broken up, like the sounds that it was making was sometimes it was there, but most of the time it wasn't. It was
perfect for like as a glitchy machine, That's how technology breaks, There was realism to that.
Oh yeah. Well, and then we also get to see in that scene, we see how tough Kay is, because there's like 3 explosions that go off very close to him throughout that scene, and he's mostly unscathed by the end of it, at least enough that he could be patched up and stuck back out there.
I really like that Deckard wasn't introduced until the third act, because they easily could have done a sequel where Deckard's through the whole thing, and maybe that's what it certainly was what I was expecting, was him to be in a lot of it. And I was pleasantly surprised that yeah, he's not until the third act of the movie. You get, Ryan Gosling's character Kay. You get to follow him through, the first, what is it, like, couple of hours. Before
it's a
you
good
even
2/3
meet
of the
Deckard.
movie.
Yeah,
that you got before you get to Deckard. Yeah, and Deckard's exactly what you would expect of Deckard at this age and in the situation that he's in. Like, I just have to be alive. I have to. I can't not be alive. And so
I love how Kay asks him, is that a real dog? Because like Deckard has a dog, and Deckard's like, I don't know, ask him.
Yeah,
right.
That was a great line.
And I love that because I like at that point with Deckard, does it even matter, right? And that's I think one of the beautiful things about this about who you have Deckard become, is that it doesn't make any difference. It's real enough, it's real enough for companionship. It's real enough for this thing that follows me around and that I have to feed and throw whiskey on the floor for, So I love that about his character that we see. He's haggard, he's worn down. He's as world weary as he was, but at the same time, he's changed. He's grown, and I think that he's learned something about himself. And that conversation they have back and forth when he finally says, sometimes to love someone, you have to be a stranger to them.
Yeah,
and it's hard because that's absolutely wrong. Except in this like one pocket case where, that's it's probably right now. It's absolutely wrong every other situation, but like in this particular situation, that's probably the best thing he can do is just not know what's going on with the child. So I love the blasters. I have to go back and talk about the props here because I think this is the best time to. How iconic everything is. So we get back to the iconic blaster that Deckard had in the original, but Kay's blaster is really cool looking in its own right. It's kind of a modification on that same idea of like a big gun with a barrel, and I love seeing the two of them kind of interchanging here with what they're shooting, and then Kay ends up with Deckard's blaster after this point.
Really? I didn't notice that. To watch it again.
So he ends up with it, and that's in his pocket. I think all the way through the end of the movie. I'm pretty sure that I don't think he loses it at any point. But yeah, he picks it up like after the explosion. Deckard drops it, and he picks it up, and that's what he uses to shoot the guys that are trying to take Deckard off. So yeah, it's kind of like this awesome passing of the torch down to this new guy. So yeah, I love everything about this scene, especially when they get in the fight and they're at the end of the fight and Deckard's just like, yeah, we could keep doing this or we could just have a drink.
Yeah.
and that's pretty iconic of that. So the last three that I think we got to go through, and move one of them around in my notes here. The last three that I think we have to go through are all Kay, because I think we see this movie really through Kay's eyes, and they're really important. And I'm going to hit a big one first, go back to a smaller one, and then hit the one that I think is really the central relationship of the movie. But Kay goes to visit this memory creator she's fabricating memories for replicants. And it's Dr. Anna Stelline. And he goes to meet her because he has a question about this memory that has surfaced in his mind with the little wooden horse. And he wants to know how you can tell a memory is real. And I love this scene because when you watch the movie a second time, you realize that the question that he's asking is not the question that she's answering.
Right.
And that's kind of what sets him off on this path of being confused about the fact that maybe he is the child that is being talked about here. And so all of these little clues have led up to this point, but he goes to visit Dr. Stelline and she sees his memory. Like there's like, I guess, a memory scanning device, and she sees his memory and he asks, how can you tell if it's real? And she says to him, someone lived this memory, and he says that he knows it's real, and she's crying because you feel like she's crying because it's like it's illegal, but what she's really crying for is that she's seeing her own memory like
Right.
a real memory that she's placed inside his head.
I thought she was crying just because, she was being empathetic with this memory.
Right.
But I had like no clue that it was hers. That was a
Yeah.
really effective twist.
Yes. Oh man, it was so well done to put her in there and to have this, and it kind of convinces you, the audience, that he's right about the fact that he is the child, and so well played, because it's very subtle. Like, everything's true. There's no lie that's stated at this point. She doesn't lie to him and say, yes, that's your memory. She says, yes, this is a real memory. And I think she's sitting on the other side of that glass, knowing what she's doing to him. And this is where you watch this movie a couple times and you start to go, what is the purpose here? Like, why did she place this memory in a replicant's head? And
yeah, that was one of my lingering questions at the end of the movie. Why?
And here's the thing, you can't know that that's not a shared memory that all the replicants have, because she works with Wallace Core and she uploads the memory, and maybe this is just an easy throwaway memory that she puts into every single replicant, and maybe it's to try and do exactly what ends up happening, right? So her purpose is to try and push this boundary and break the wall down.
And what the other thing I was thinking of in connection with that is, like, don't they say at some point that Kay is basically a perfect genetic match of her? That, like, because there was supposedly a boy and a girl, and one is a copy and one's the real child. So I got this idea, okay, so Kay is the genetic copy, so he's the replicant.
Well, but he says that's not possible, and I think what you're seeing there is just the obfuscation that Deckard pulled.
Yeah, because they talk about that when he meets the other replicants, or kind of in the underground resistance. That's what gets revealed to him, is that this was all part of layers upon layers upon layers of protecting her.
A bodyguard of lies, as Winston Churchill would say.
Right.
Exactly. And it's just that whole plot is done so well, and a lot of it has to do with the acting and the writing. But you feel so bad for Kay when he finds out that he's not.
Yeah. Because his whole hero's journey is disrupted.
Right. But then I think the really beautiful thing from that is that he very quickly rises from the ashes and renews his purpose in a way that nobody could have predicted, right? And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the end of this film, is that you've sat through nearly 3 hours of like a really emotionally fraught film, and there's a payoff at the end that's huge. Like, you really feel like the main character gets somewhere, and it's the end is sad. Like, there's a very, like, you're not really sure if he lives or dies, but the point is that he's grown, he's changed, he's taken some autonomy and some control of his own destiny, and created this thing that he wanted to create, that maybe nobody else could have predicted, nobody else could have known was even possible. And he did it, and he made it happen. And I love that about that end that he's given, where he does have that taken away from him, right? The destiny of being that child is taken away from him, but it also frees him to be whatever he wants to be. He doesn't have to be a replicant anymore. He doesn't have to be subject to any laws or anything. He can follow his own path. So that brings us to one of my other relationships in the film that I think is really interesting, and it'll bring us into our final conversation that I think I want to end on, because our final character conversation that I want to end on. But the relationship between Kay and his alter ego, Joe, which is the moniker that's given to him by his Joy. And watching through this time, I was like really trying to pick up on that name and how many times it's used. And the cool thing about it is that so Joy, who's his personal AI
holographic wife,
essentially, right? picks up on all of this stuff that's happening and says that since he's now a real person, like he's a real human, as he's starting to feel that, she gives him the name Joe. She says, I'm going to call you Joe. And it's such a disappointing name. Like when you hear it, even in the thing, you're like, what's the difference between K and Joe? You know, it's really, there's not much difference between those two things. Everybody already calls him K. They don't call him by his whole name. But then when he goes and presents himself to Deckard, he offers his number, and Deckard says that's not a name. And so he offers the name Joe. And that's the only name that Deckard knows him by. So much so that even at the end of the film, when they're closing out and they go to visit Deckard's daughter, he refers to him as Joe. Yeah. And it's jarring because at that point we know he's not a human, right? But Deckard is still affording him that reality of giving him a name rather than a number. And I debated really hard whether or not we were going to call him Joe or K as we go through this thing. I think it's only justifiable to call him K because that's who he is, and that's what he ends up being by the end of the movie. Yeah. Well, and I think he really owns it by the end of the movie too. Like he really owns K by the end of the movie. And I like that for him too. So this brings me to my big question that's going to kind of lead us into the final conversation. Joy. And who she is and what she represents in this film. And in the most bizarre way, she's this character that's just very tangent to everything that's happening. She's an AI, she's a hologram, she's very clearly a pleasure model of something that's very highly consumeristic, that we don't even get a sense of that though until halfway through the film. And we don't get a sense of how big a deal that is until like the final quarter of the film, when all of this stuff is stripped away from him and he is confronted with how she comes up with the name basically for him. But here's my question to you guys, and this is something that my wife and I are still going back and forth after watching this movie, is how autonomous do you feel like Joy really is?
The way I would view it, she's a program. She's a very sophisticated program, even a very, very sophisticated program. But to me, she's the same as the Doctor from Star Trek Voyager. You know, she's not truly a living being. It's funny, I think she's less human than the replicants are. Because the way I see it, the replicants are just humans that are birthed from test tubes instead of, normal human procreation. They're still humans. They still have human DNA. They still have souls. Whereas Joy is just a very sophisticated machine.
Interesting.
And I think, her character is really an interesting juxtaposition against this whole question of what does it mean to be alive and what does it mean to be human.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so you see, like, throughout the movie, and I think I tend to agree with you, Thomas, but she does all these things that she knows will please him because that's what she's designed to do.
Right. And
even when she gets to the point where, because she's a hologram, they cannot physically be together, she finds a way around that to kind of fake it. But even then, it's not really her, and it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she's an interesting character because you can bounce those ideas off of her. But I think overall, she doesn't really love him because she's not capable of loving, because she is just a computer program.
Now, see, this was my thought too. And this is where I was coming from when I was starting this conversation with my wife, because I was like, she's essentially like the whole concept of this program is see what you want to see, hear what you want to hear. Right. That's like the shtick that runs with it. But, and my wife threw this in there, she said, there's a very key moment with her character that you have to take into consideration. And that's when she makes the self-sacrifice of telling him to break her off from the network. And she very clearly in that moment knows that that's going to be her end. That's her demise, is being broken from the network, and there's no backup of her. She's going to be in his pocket at that point. And that is not something that she does as a sense of pleasing him. out of like, that's what he wants to hear. That's what he, she does it because she has developed some sense of autonomy as well, and has pushed past that boundary of just being a program and is now something more than that. And I think, Thomas, you brought up the soul question, which
they address in the movie.
Good question. Yeah. Oh yeah. They do, like that scene where he's talking with Lieutenant Joshi, and he says, I've never killed something with a soul. And
right. Which was like I took issue with that, because he's like, oh, well, you have to be born to have a soul. And I'm like, well, no, you don't. Like, in my view, the replicants have souls. They're humans. They have human DNA. They're just manufactured from scratch instead of, being the product of normal procreation. But it's funny that like in order to objectify them, they put that thing like, oh, you don't have souls because you're not born like normal people.
Yeah. Well, and then I think I pushed it further, like thinking about this idea of Joy and what she is, because there's some level of like a program that's just there to please. But then also there's that whole scene with him breaking her off of the network too. The big concern is that they're going to be able to get into her memories
right
with him. And that's something that he always has a problem with throughout the film too, is the memories that he has are not his. And he's aware of that until the point where he's confused about maybe they are mine. Maybe they are my memories. Maybe they are real memories that I really had. And that, and like you were saying, Jack, that it's heartbreaking when we see him being told that that's not him. And when it settles into the rebellion leader's mind, she realizes, oh, you thought you were the child. Yeah. That, we all wish we were, but no, like he really did actually have reason to believe that was him. And then to have it just stripped from you in that moment it's gut wrenching. But it's interesting because it's all about those memories. And the odd thing here is that we're willing to give them a soul because they have a physical form, but they have someone else's memories. Whereas it's harder to give Joy a soul, whereas the thing she is a product of her own memories. Like she is truly the product of the memories that she's collected, but she doesn't have a physical being. And so like the questions that raise, like it just shakes the whole foundation of what you're trying to think about when you're talking about the replicants and who they are and whether or not they have souls. And it digs really deep into the stuff that I love talking about, like when we start talking about artificial intelligence and whether or not it can have a soul and what that's going to be like and how we're going to have to wrestle with that, because I feel like that's something that we will have to wrestle with. And there's precedent. This is the thing that I really want to like encourage everybody with. There's precedent for this question too, because when the explorers came across from Europe and they encountered people in the Americas who had never heard the word of God, there were a lot of questions about whether or not they could possibly have souls.
Right.
Like, why would God have abandoned these people so thoroughly that they had never heard of him at all? And so when the priests came across initially with those explorers, there was a lot of debate about whether or not we should minister to them. There were a lot of atrocities committed because of that, right? Because, like we're saying here, you could dehumanize them by saying, well, they just don't have souls. That obviously they were forsaken by God. We can forsake them too, but that's not the case. Like we had to really go through and think, like, what does it mean that these people are here separated in this way? And I think you have a lot of similar questions here that rise up with this idea of fabricated humans.
Yeah, definitely. Or like, if we were to discover intelligent alien life, it would be the same thing, like, well, they're separated from us on another planet, but, like if they share our intelligence, but, they would still be biological. And that's the thing, that the replicants are biological, whereas Joy is so clearly a non-biological entity that I find it difficult to credit the idea of her having a soul. Like, even though she appears to have, emergent behaviors and be, like you say, kind of semi-autonomous and make a self-sacrificial decision. I'm like, is it like, when would your laptop ever sacrifice itself for you? I mean, like, right. So there is that interesting question.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of interesting metaphysical questions that go along with that. With what does it mean to be alive, and is well, because the funny thing is, like, as Catholics, we believe in angels, and they're not biological, but they have souls.
That's true.
That's obviously not a prerequisite for being ensouled. So I know there's a lot of theologians who tend to fall on the side of an AI could never be truly sentient, but I think it's more of an open question than we probably realize.
Yeah, thinking about it, it may be just simply a different kind of sapient than what biological entities have.
Well, and that's why I think I really do think, like, the most important, impactful scene in this movie is actually the scene where Joy cheats with Mariette, and she uses a physical form to be able to interact with Kay, and I really, like, I hone in on that scene because it does all of the things. Like, it's the whole movie in a small microcosm, where you take the desire to be real and the lack of ability to ever break that boundary for whatever reason. Either it's Kay not being able to have an actual childhood, or it's Joy not being able to have a physical form, or even Wallace not being able to create life that they can then create life, right? There are so many characters in this movie that lack the ability to fully actualize themselves as real in the way that they phrase it, right? And then we see that it doesn't matter. Those characters are able to actualize themselves, not in these kind of cheap ways like Joy does with Mariette, but in the sacrifice that she makes for Kay of, like, pulling yourself off the network.
That's when she's the most human, not
exactly.
when she's inhabiting Mariette's body.
Bingo. And I think that's what's beautiful about this movie, is that we have those moments for so many of these characters. Like, we get that moment for Kay later after he's realized, the kind of farce that he's in. He still makes the decision to go and not just kill Deckard, but make it look like Deckard died, and then take Deckard to his daughter. And that's his choice, separate from the things that he's been told he has to do. And it's that kind of sense of, like, fulfilling purpose, of creating a purpose for yourself. There is no destiny that we have. We just have to rise to the occasion we're given. And I love that sense in this movie. Like, I think that's really that whole scene of her inhabiting Mariette and then making the sacrifice for Kay, how those two things kind of dovetail together. It's beautiful. Like, it's really just such a great image of the whole record of what does it mean to be human, that the original one and this one ask so well.
Yeah, and I think actually another, probably less important than this, but another kind of key scene with Joy and Kay is when they're looking through the DNA records, and Joy comments, "Look, mere data makes a man. ATCG, the different, I forget what they're called, but the little letters of DNA." And, and she's like, for you, it's 4, for me, it's 2 1s and 0s, but clearly in the case of humans, it's not just mere data that makes the man. We're more than the sum of our parts. We're emergent from that. And I guess the point the movie is probably trying to make is, well, so is she. She's more than the sum of her parts of the 1s and 0s.
Which is, it's a good, and that's why I feel like Jack was saying, I feel this is really an open question that needs some more exploration, right? And it might not ever be an issue. Like, I think that there's plenty of computer scientists that think that we'll never achieve, like, a true artificial intelligence, and we don't have reason to believe that we will. We are creating very intelligent machines, but they are very specifically, like you said, Thomas, they're programs, right? That's what they are.
But, and they still look and behave machine-like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm intrigued to see, as we go further down that road. And I've had this discussion with a couple of people. I think interestingly, the first AI that's going to wake up, if we ever have one wake up, it's going to be a car. So we're going to have to ponder the reality of a car having a soul. And so yeah, go back to our Herbie,
Cars, Disney's Cars comes to life.
So, but I think that's something that we're going to, if it's going to happen, I think that's really where we're going to hit it first, is that sense of like awareness of self and of kind of where you are and who you are and that you exist and that you are a thing. But still, I'm
more worried about replicants in the future of us creating people from scratch to use as servants or slaves. Like, what is that one line in the movie that, like, we couldn't stand enslaving people anymore as long as they weren't, just built from scratch. I forget who says it. It might be Wallace.
It's Wallace who says that.
Wallace,
He talks about how we've lost our stomach for slavery.
Yeah,
which is funny because then you go to the orphanage and well, there you go.
They're still slaves,
it's still very real. And those are real kids. They're not replicants. Those are real kids. So it's still very real. I worry
like that could be like, with gene editing and, designer babies and such, that there's this push for, more kind of genetic engineering to either create some people where, like, the super rich can afford to be upgraded and given essentially superpowers, or we can create, a servile, race of servants to do the menial tasks that humans don't want to do anymore. And that's what makes these movies a little bit scary, or are we seeing into the future, through a mirror darkly, like.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think, it harkens back to the old books, Aldous Huxley. I forget the name of the book.
Brave New World.
That's the one. There we go.
Yeah.
I knew one of you would have it for me. Yeah. So it's Brave New World, where everyone's edited, everyone is designed, and it's scary. This is something that we've been thinking about for ages, and I'm very glad that eugenics is not part of our modern discussion openly and directly.
That's the thing, though. It's just more nefarious. Like,
right.
Even with ways that genes can be manipulated, like with like artificial like in vitro fertilization and all that, like it's not as nakedly sinister, but it still is the commodification of human life.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Turning people into commodities, into something that can be commercialized almost. Yeah, it can be exactly the way you wanted, a mail order baby, like.
And another great movie about that one is Gattaca. Have you guys seen that one? That's a good one.
No, I haven't. I have to check that out.
Definitely recommend that one.
It asks a lot of the same questions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'd like to end with the final scene, because I think it's the best way to wrap this movie up. So we have this big fight that's absolutely, like you said, Jack, the fights in this movie are really meaningful, really powerful. They're about the characters, and it's Kay just learned that he's not actually this replicant child. He goes and he attacks the caravan that's trying to take Deckard off world and kills everyone except for Love, wrecks the car, and then gets in a fight with Love right on the shore as the car is being drug out into the ocean, right beneath the wall, which there's so much symbolism in everything that happens here. But the fight is so brilliant because it's like you get to see two replicants that are roughly at the top of their game fight, and it's kind of no holds barred. They're really brutal. They forego weapons mostly, and but the passion behind the way that they're fighting and why they're fighting, and the lines that they deliver, especially when Love beats him and says that she's the best, and you realize that everything she's doing, she feels like she has to prove herself because she's not good enough for Wallace. It's just such a gut-wrenching moment and so good. And then Kay manages to, overcome that and actually defeat her in the end, and save Deckard. And then Deckard's free to go because, as far as anybody knows, Deckard's dead. And so the first thing Kay does is deliver him to his daughter. And before we get to see like the real ramifications of that reunion, there's not even a word exchanged between them, at least not from Deckard's side. That's the end of the movie. It's just, yeah. How do you guys feel about the end?
I thought it was great. I didn't want something that's has a nice little bow put on it, because you can't do that with this kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
It asks more questions, and it's one of those things you got to watch again and again and think about. It's not a movie that's going to answer the questions for you. Like, we didn't even touch on this, but the fact that they don't answer whether or not Deckard actually is a replicant, which I'm very glad they didn't, because
that was terrific.
We don't need an answer to that.
Yeah.
I don't want an answer to that.
I was so afraid they were going to answer it. And I'm like, please don't. And when they didn't, I was like, perfect. That's great. Like, leave it unanswered.
No, they gave us a Blade Runner that was a replicant. That's what they needed to do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It just wasn't Deckard, as far as we know. Like,
as far as we know, we're not sure. And so I think that's the brilliant moment at the end. It's just that there's a lot of open questions, and there are even more open questions than there were at the end of the first movie.
Yeah, because I think this movie takes. Yeah, it's like we said at the beginning. This movie takes all those concepts and expands upon them, and really handles them much more deftly, I feel like, than the original.
Yeah, it's able to. It breathes so much, and I joke about this because I feel like there are so many scenes literally where that's what we're doing, is we're listening to someone breathe. But the film itself just has this sense of drawing breath to it all the way through, where it swells and it calms, and it's just got that like ebb and flow. And there's always a barrier between us and the answers. And the beautiful thing is that at the end of the movie, that barrier is still there, but that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes its audience very seriously, much like the first movie did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, part of the reason why I just think it's great. It's fantastic. And, not enough movies are done that way.
No, definitely. And it's funny. I think you mentioned that you'd not seen Arrival, Thomas, and you have seen Arrival, Thomas. But that movie, I saw that one and I like it fine, but I feel like you can definitely see where the studio got their hands in it, because there's so many weird cuts in that movie. There's one scene in particular that's like a very long just voiceover where the Amy Adams character is just explaining what's going on. And I'm like, this movie, if you just cut out that voiceover, this would have made this like 10 times better. So I almost feel like this movie was him with the leeway to do what he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Dune. I think he's got that star power now where he can make the movie he wants to make.
Very, yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if I think I compared him before we started the podcast to Terrence Malick, and that's where I really feel he fits in that kind of vein, where the movie is so artistically done that it really transcends just being a cinema pick, right? Where it's like, and the beautiful thing about it though is that like this is a movie you can take somebody to who's not really like a high art movie, and you can sit down with them and watch it and they'll still enjoy it. Like they might feel like it's slow, and they might feel like Ridley Scott and say, you probably could have cut half an hour of that movie and it would have been okay, but they'll still get it, right? But then if you're like really like into film and the way that film's done, like you see this the artistry that goes into making this and all the symbolism. And man, I can watch this movie. I seriously, I've watched it 4 times, and every single time I've gotten something new. Like every time you watch it, you can watch it from a new character's perspective and get something out of it. And then you can go back through and just watch it for the plot points and get something new out of it. And just go back through and watch it for the setting and the scenery and why certain shots are done from in certain places. It is just a really, really good movie.
And on that same token, this is a movie you could take someone to who is not a sci-fi fan, and they could still appreciate it as a good movie, because it kind of transcends that label.
Right.
in much the same way the new Dune has for a lot of people.
Yeah, because it's about the characters. It really is about the who's in it, what they're doing, what's happening to them. So yeah, I like it.
I really think that Denis Villeneuve has left his mark not just on film but on sci-fi as a genre. And as a sci-fi fan, you know, if he does more movies like this, I mean, I know we're going to get Dune Part 2. He's even, I think, hinted at maybe a Dune Part 3 that'll cover Dune Messiah. You know, if he does, like, I'm just down for anything science fiction that he does. And
he's also adapting Rendezvous at Rama, the Arthur C. Clarke novel.
Oh, really? Oh, so I'm very excited for that then.
He's the perfect director for that book.
Yeah. I haven't read the book, but I know enough about it that I am totally down with that directing choice.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, if these can be for future sci-fi what Star Wars was for sci-fi, you know,
in the 80s
after it, I'm in. And let's have tons more like this, please.
Yeah, and just as a movie, I was just very impressed by it. Enjoyed it even more than the first one. This does what a good sequel should do, and I think that's my final thought on it.
Jack, anything from you?
Yeah, just echoing what Thomas said. It's just a fantastic movie. It's honestly probably one of my favorite movies now, just because it's so rich and there's so much you can get out of it. Yeah, and I really think that it builds upon the original and is really the best version of the Blade Runner story that we've gotten.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with both of you. And yeah, the more I watch it, the more it moves up in my ranks too. I liked it, but rewatching it, it's elevated. It's so good. Like, I really, really love this movie. It does everything. The beats are hit correctly. You know, the cinematography is awesome. The coloring is so good. So yeah, I'm 100% in. I'll watch anything Denis Villeneuve puts out. That's 100% my I'm in. I'm along for the ride, like you said, Thomas. If he does it, yeah, and that's a big statement for me. If he's going to do a third Dune movie that's covering the Messiah parts of the story, because I can stop after the first book and I'm done with Dune. So I'm still on board if he's interested in doing the rest of it. But that's a big
up
ask.
To Messiah, which I've read Dune Messiah, and I thought that was an okay sequel. I know the ones after that, like Children of Dune and Beyond, get a little odd, but
oh yeah, it gets weird. It gets weird fast.
A little. Yeah.
All right. So that is it from us. What did you think, listener, about Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049? Be sure to email us or comment on our Facebook or Twitter page and let us know. You can email us any feedback by finding StarQuest on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia and on Twitter at SQPN. And especially if you are someone who watched this movie without having seen the first movie, I'd love to hear from you because I'm really interested in that perspective. If you haven't yet, join our Discord. There's a lot of good discussions going on over there. You can check that out at our StarQuest website. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show in your preferred podcast aggregator or subscribe to us on YouTube. To find any previous episodes of Secrets of Movies and TV Shows, or to find another member of our fantastic podcast family, please visit sqpn.com. Once again, Thomas Salerno, thank you for joining me for The Secrets of Blade Runner.
Thank you, Thomas.
It's been great. And Jack Baruzzini, thank you also.
Thanks.
Once again, I'm Thomas Sanjurjo. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV on StarQuest.